The Governor-General's response to the crisis facing the Canadian Parliament was quintessential Canadian. In granting the Prime Minister's request to prorogue Parliament until January 26, 2009, she made the correct decision. When she found herself between a rock and a hard place, she did not deal with the crisis head-on. Instead, her decision to agree to Prime Minister Harper's request to prorogue Parliament took a middle ground. Like the umpire in the ring, she stood between the parties and sent them back to their corners for a timeout. She told the Canadian public that she is not yet ready to declare one a winner over the other. Given that the Canadian public had just been to the polls a few weeks earlier, given that there had not actually been a confidence motion in which a majority of members of Parliament voted against the government, given that it was not yet clear from the media, polls, and other sources where the Canadian public stood on the issue, and given that a measured and deliberate response to the crisis should not happen in the heat of the moment, her decision was correct. The Governor-General had two choices. She could grant the Prime Minister's request to prorogue Parliament, or she could refuse his request to prorogue Parliament. In our democratic system, she could have decided that the government had lost the confidence of the House on the basis that the three opposition parties had signed an agreement to vote against the economic statement that the government was proposing. Had she done this, she would have then faced an immediate dilemma. Should she ask the coalition to form the government, or should she dissolve Parliament and call an election a mere couple of weeks after one had just been held? This decision would require that she have some certainty and comfort in what the opposition parties were proposing, and some assurance that the Canadian public would stand behind such a coalition government. She did not have this information, and without it, a decision to call upon the coalition to form the government could have risked moving the crisis from the House to the streets of Canada. To avoid this happening, she and the Canadian public needed time to reflect and consider how best to proceed. It is important that her decision be viewed as one made by and on behalf of Canadians, and not as an arbitrary choice on her part. Some may argue that the Governor-General's decision simply postponed the inevitable, and that what she's done is create uncertainty at a time when Canada can least afford it. Yes, there is some uncertainty to banks, investors, business, and employees. But the fact is that the coalition can use this time to work on and prepare the details of a viable economic package that it will present to Canadians as an alternative. And the government can also provide specifics on how it proposes to deal with the economic crisis. All we have now is a general statement that the government has not done or offered to do enough, and that the coalition is promising to do more to help the economy. The timeout offered by the Governor-General's decision will allow both parties to come prepared with specifics and details to debate on January 26, 2009 as to how they will deal with the economic crisis, something more than vague statements and promises. And at the same time, both the government and the coalition can inform the Canadian public on the details and specifics of what each would have to offer as government and allow the public to make its opinion known. Coalition supporters were anxious to see the government removed and the coalition government given power. They argued that the Conservatives in fact did not have the support of a majority of Canadians, and that the coalition, representing as it does 61% of the voting population, does have the support of a majority of Canadians. This may very well be the case, and were Canada to adopt an electoral system of proportional representation, the crisis unfolding today would not be a crisis. It would simply be necessary for the parties to work together in a spirit of compromise, respecting the views and opinions of each other, and trying to find common ground in order to best serve the public. We do not have a system of proportional government, but we do have a democratic system that allows for coalition governments. The Governor-General is aware of this. The Canadian Constitution allows it. There have been precedents of coalition governments that have functioned successfully, both at times of war and times of peace. Prime Minister Borden's Union government kept the Conservatives in power during the First World War thanks to the support of the Liberals who voted to support it. In Ontario, during the 1980s, the Liberals and the New Democratic Party joined forces to defeat the Conservative Party. The Governor-General's decision should have been made in a more transparent manner. The Canadian public is entitled to know how she has reached her decision, what did she base it on, and what were her reasons. Any time a decision is made behind closed doors, images of conspiracy and pressure surface, and rumors abound. As she is making a decision for and on behalf of every Canadian, we should know both how she reached her decision and why. Fundamental to our Canadian democracy is that government is open and transparent. Debates are public. Hansard is a written record of what transpires in the House. At any time, we can read what bills are being introduced and what is debated. This open discussion and weighing of the issues is missing from the current process that has the Governor-General effectively holding the power to determine who will form Canada's government tomorrow. Such a critical power, even though rarely used, must be understood by the Canadian public if it is to retain its legitimacy. So while I am of the opinion that the Governor-General's decision to prorogue Parliament was correct, she should have opened the doors when all the cameras were bearing down on them and invited the Canadian public in to hear the Prime Minister plead his case and to hear her reasons for why she decided as she did. A healthy democracy deserves nothing less.